皆様、本日は
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for attending Innovative City Forum. The title or the theme of this Innovative City Forum is Designing Life for the Future. We invite leading experts from leading-edge technology, urban development, art and creativity, as well as economy and industries. And our intention is to encourage interdisciplinary discussion and exchange of information and opinions. Now, we would like to open Tokyo 2035 Urban Strategy Symposium of Innovative City Forum. First of all, I will welcome opening remarks by Heizo Takenaka, Professor of Tokyo University, Professor Emeritus of Keio University, Chairman, Institute for Urban Strategies, Mori Memorial Foundation, and the President of Academy Hills. He's going to explain the purpose of this session. Now, Professor Takenaka, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Heizo Takenaka. So, Innovative City Forum, this is day 2. The forum started yesterday, and I believe that you have already received a lot of stimulus and stimulating input. So the Tokyo 2035, well, that is the title of this part of the forum. And there are many sessions, but this particular one is titled Urban Strategy Symposium, and I believe that this is going to be a core program of this forum. So at the Institute for Urban Strategies of Mori Memorial Foundation, over the past 3 years, we conducted a lot of study. We collected data, information, identified directions, and considered different possibilities. And we conducted brainstorming by inviting experts in this field. For example, mobility, what will happen to the mobility? And with AI, how our lifestyle is going to change. And then the urban space, how will it change in the future? Of course, we don't have easy answers to these questions. And of course, everybody is not of the same opinion. However, we conducted a number of brainstormings and discussions and created a vision out of that. So the first part of the program will be explained by the presentation made by Professor Ichikawa, who has been engaged in the discussion. Well, you may have agreement or disagreement. Please think about what will be presented. And then yesterday, once again, well, this is also issued by the Power City Index, or the ranking and rating of the cities in the world. They published by Institute for Urban Strategies, and this marks the 10th announcement of the ranking of the cities in Tokyo. And so based upon that announcement, after break, we would like to talk more specifically about this particular topic. And in creating this, the city ranking, executive committee was formed. And I will introduce to you later about the details. But the urban issues, the leading experts, 4 leading experts, and the members of the team will come here and join us, so that we will have the luxury of having a very high level of a discussion on this particular topic. And one thing I noted, well, the picture of myself was shown, and the picture shows myself with the same color of necktie. I have a lot of neckties, but today I happen to wear the same one as the picture shown earlier. But anyway, well, once again, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to all of you who participated in this session, and hope to have an active discussion today. So please enjoy the intellectual enjoyment of the discussion. Professor Takenaka, thank you very much.
続きまして
Next, we'd like to call upon Professor Hirao Ichikawa, Professor and Dean of Professional Graduate School of Governance Studies at Meiji University. He is also Executive Director of the Institute for Urban Strategies, the Mori Memorial Foundation. He will be giving the presentation on the Tokyo 2035 urban strategy. Professor, please. Now, today's theme is Tokyo 2035. I'd like to talk about what is going to happen to Tokyo in this time frame. And I would also like to present my future vision. In 2008, GPCI, the urban ranking has begun. We have made the announcement yesterday. So we are commemorating the 10th anniversary. ICF is celebrating the 5th anniversary. We have been holding many sessions in the Innovative City Forum to talk about the future vision of cities. Now today, I would like to talk about the Radiant World City, enhancing a Radiant World City. Currently, we're in 2017. And the target is 20 years out, or 18 years. We would like to identify the vision for Tokyo in that time frame. Obviously, this will require strategy. So, in discussing strategies, I would like to talk about what we vision Tokyo to become. Let me review the process that we have been going through so far. First of all, obviously, in our research institute, various social indicators are covered. And climate is also included. Infrastructure status has also been subject to research. And the basic premise is population. New York, London, our rivals, they are continuing to increase the population. However, in 2025 and beyond, or even 20, perhaps after 2030, up until 2030, we will see population increase. But after that, we are poised to have a population decline. So it is already happening in Japan overall, but it is likely to happen in Tokyo as well. So let's look at the world city population projections. London, New York, and Hong Kong is rising. However, Tokyo is declining. Therefore, Tokyo is an exception to the rule. In terms of population, we are seeing a declining trend. And more recently, this is a global theme that we are considering, which is climate change. And the Tokyo's climate is undergoing changes. Yesterday was very hot, today is cold, and there is also heavy rains. For rains, torrential rain is increasing. This is also one phenomenon of climate change. In terms of infrastructure, the three-ringed expressway is very important. In 2040, it should be completed. On the other hand, there is aging of the infrastructure because it has continued to develop and it is likely to deteriorate, similar to human beings. So after 40 years and 50 years, we have to rethink the infrastructure. In the case of Tokyo, in the 1960s, significant infrastructure was constructed. Now it is aging. So these are challenges besetting us in terms of how we should deal with infrastructure. A second point I'd like to point out is the development of technology. This is very significant in the Innovative City Forum. We discussed amongst experts. Inclusive of technology, we have to consider the mechanism of cities. We have discussed the changes that are taking place, the living, work, mobility of the world, of the future, as well as entertainment. These are four areas that we have discussed: future living, future mobility, future work, and future entertainment. Now, in the Innovative City Forum, we have taken up various case studies as well. First is the strategy for creating urban cities. People are coming back to the urban cities, and focuses from cars to pedestrians. And there is also a global city vision as well. We are also taking up this theme for this forum, but New York, London, Paris, from these cities, we have invited experts. So it's prosperity and beyond. because prosperity will also have a poverty in its background. This is how the urban city should be considered. High tech has also been covered, and in voting process, my proposition did not receive support. But I think there should be an identity for Tokyo. There is fashion for Paris, musicals in New York, financial city for London. But what is Tokyo famous for? We have to establish identity for Tokyo. This is inclusive of the concept of authenticity. This is a session from last year. The development is taking place at a phenomenal speed in Tokyo. Not just hard, but also soft areas. Area management is making progress as well. So against this backdrop, what is going to happen to the city environment? This is what we have been discussing. And I will be sharing with you the results of research. And also there are projects that have been analyzed from other cities such as London, Paris, and New York. Now, let me talk about the vision for Tokyo in 2035. But before that, we should consider the 10 years out first. In the coming 10 years, what is going to happen? Because it's visible. Within Tokyo, there are various projects already announced. So if realized, we can visualize what is going to happen. In the 5-year radius of urban area, there is a significant development, and there is the most significant development in Tokyo compared to other cities. Let me give you a visual presentation of what is going to occur. The most important area is Tokyo Station. The west and east development has been taking place. And as we are poised to have the Olympic Games on the Yaesu area, Kyobashi is seeing a significant development. The color-coded buildings will be erected going forward. 390 meters is on the north side of Tokyo Station. East side, in coming 10 years, the number of buildings will increase by a factor of 2. There's going to be significant change on the western side. They are also going through another process of redevelopment. There is the Imperial Palace, there is Tokyo Station, there is Toranomon, and Roppongi. These are the areas that are evolving within the city environment of Tokyo. This is looking at this from the seaside, the Hamamatsu-cho and Shinagawa area. These areas are undergoing a significant change, especially in the coming 10 years. The landscape is likely to change significantly. This is Toranomon. Toranomon Hills is only one building, but within the 5 years, surrounding area will have many buildings constructed. That means that this will be another center location of Tokyo. For Toranomon to the Roppongi area is the area that is changing most significantly. You can see that more than half of the buildings are new. Shintora Dori, we are trying to make this the Tokyo's Champs-Élysées. So it used to be Japanese old man's area. Is likely to undergo significant change. What is going to be very important is the terminal. There is going to be 6 new buildings. There will be a new station created here. So this is a major terminal change that is taking place. The station is now undergoing significant change. Now let's look at the Olympic Games areas. This is the Lynd area. South side is the Olympic Game venue, and in the middle, Toyosu Market. Left-hand side is the athletes' village. After the Olympic Games, there will be 2 skyscrapers developed for as condominiums, which will be sold. Then the population here will be 10,000. Therefore, it means that there is going to be significant changes. This is a bird's-eye view of Tokyo. But now we have to think about what is going to happen thereafter until 2035. Let's look at the Roppongi Toramon area. Here I'll be very quiet.
あと50分で会場の見学です。車を呼びますか？
ありがとう。お願い。すごい大規模ですね。
東京が世界中から注目されますから。美香さん、そのコート新作ですよね？
そう、テストプリントしてみたんです。どうかな？
ああ、シャンゼリゼを颯爽と歩けそうなデザインですね。
え？
今回のイベントでもステージ映えすると思いますよ。
そうね。東京のイベントなんだけどな。制服で出歩くのほんと楽。ここ海外の人も多くていつも悩むよね。
だよね。この街ってどんな服が似合うんだろうね。東京っぽさってこと？洗練されてるけどちょっと尖ってる感じかな。難しい。
いやー、おかげさまで良いイベントになりました。
ありがとうございます。こちらこそ素晴らしい舞台を用意してくださり光栄です。
みんなの協力があったからこそです。来年もぜひよろしくお願いしますよ。
さてこれが
So this is a 2035 vision of Tokyo. So what is included? There are various factors to consider. Now, according to the experts meeting, we have discussed state-of-the-art technologies which are included here. Let me review what we have seen. First of all, living as mobility, entertainment, and built environment. These are the 5 approaches that are included. This is the first scene that we saw. And this is the current Roppongi. Looking at this from the Shibuya side, as you can see, there are drones already working, conducting maintenance and other work. And if you look above, there is no airplanes above Tokyo, but the route above Tokyo will now be open for airplanes. And you can see that in the buildings there is greenery at the rooftop, and Roppongi Dori has currently has an expressway, but now it will go away because a new system will be introduced. This is the drone that will be used, and this is doing very good work this time. And this is the working space within the home. Obviously, there will be teleworking increasing, and there will be more robots being used. And Mika is the protagonist here, and she is being killed by the robots. And obviously, biometrics as well as voice recognition are being used. This is Mika's room. I'm sorry, I can't give you a detailed explanation in the interest of time, but it does reflect life 20 years out. And the lifestyle will change significantly. This is the robot. These are the robots that are being used. This is the third scene. Mika is now moving. As you can see here, it's unmanned. Taxis will be unmanned. It will be self-driving. And when necessary, it can be used on-demand basis. This will become the norm. These are the taxis that will be used. And in the taxi, information will be on the windows. That will be same for the houses as well. Information will be on the screen, will be on the windows, so therefore there will no longer be a need for screens, and information communication can take place this way. So the display method will change in the personal space. This is outside. Looking at the mobility, you can see that most of the automobiles are unmanned, self-driving, using a big AI for fleet management. There will no longer be a traffic congestion. Now, Ring Road number 2 is being used for our event, and as you can see, there is less people. Because there will be a depopulation, population decline, and workers will decrease in number, but work will be replaced by robots. And this is an event in the Ring Road number 2. And this is in collaboration between the public sector and private sector. Using a public space, entertainment will be provided, and this is such a model. These are the drones on the ground. Mika is working. And the people here are already using translation device, so anyone can communicate amongst each other, even between different languages, with this translation device. This is going from Roppongi to Toranomon. There will be autonomous buses driving.
And earlier you have seen this. So the 10 minutes prior to the rainfall, you can receive the warning. So this is a wearable device, and IoT will come to this level, prediction of the weather. And then the question is how you respond to the warning that you receive. And recently, just like any other cities, we are suffering from the very heavy torrential rainfall, and the question is how to cope with this. So, well, first of all, the idea is to create the green areas, parks, and also against the climate change, new actions have to be taken. And so this is the backside of the ring road number 2. There's a park, and what kind of the multifunction can we expect from the park or the greenery, open area? And one idea is in Tokyo, if we work very hard in Tokyo, then that will have a ripple effect to the entire nation. So the signage, for example, is one example. Well, these slides are very heavy, and sorry, my PC doesn't like this data. So the urban development, it looks natural, nothing special. However, you see a lot of greeneries and open space. And open space is utilized in many ways. So area management will be more enhanced. So this is Atago Shrine and the history and culture. Well, to an extent, we can incorporate the historical and cultural aspect of Tokyo into the city. I beg your pardon once again. By the way, in the middle of Tokyo, well, the Edo Castle was the starting point of the development of Tokyo, and there are a lot of resources. Well, in the center, we have Edo Castle, and there are many other areas. And if we identify them and develop them, we can create a new city. Right next to Atagoyama, there is a place called Furukawa. So what is Furukawa? Maybe many of you don't know what it is. But because there is the overhead highway like this already, and then place looks like this, and it is almost dead. But 20 years from now, naturally, this should be enhanced like this, because the infrastructure system and highway system will be changed, and this place will turn into a place where people can relax with the little creek. Well, there was the little the creek in the past, and this water area will be revived. And this is the plaza of Arc Hills, and there are many devices. Well, the virtual currency will be made available. People will go the cashless, and also the payment settlement system will be introduced, and many things can be handled by robots. So maybe this will be reality 20 years from now. So this is another robot. And then, well, the question is also about the entertainment in the U.S., the New York, well, the Broadway, Bryant Park. Well, there are entertainment event almost every day, every night. So how will this change the outdoor as well as indoor environment? So the entertainment, the coming out of the building and coming to the outdoor, what will happen to that is another question. And this person, she works using virtual technology, and she's working on fashion using virtual capability, and then using 3D printing, she can create the fashionable dresses and garments. So this is the level of the utilization of 3D printing in 20 years' time. And then, well, I talked about the ring road number 2, and how much public space will be utilized together with based upon the collaboration between public and private sector. And the cars may be even able to fly. Entertainment, computers, and the holograms can be used. So the entertainment will be more three-dimensional, the virtual experience. And this is indoor office space. And as you can see, even today, this is true, but the plants are there within in the office space, and the face-to-face communication. Well, the importance associated with face-to-face is also what we have to look at. Well, of course, the latest, the most recent the data can be utilized for the business purposes. So well, we will be starting the discussion, but the words that we used and the discussion and the dialogue between these two girls said like sophisticated and something edgy, I guess. So we often talk about what are the uniqueness of Tokyo. If a city doesn't have identity, then our presence will be weakened and the lowered. So what is happening to Tokyo today? It may be sophisticated, but something edgy or something the unique may be lacking. So because Japanese society wants to respect harmony among all the people. However, considering the competition against other cities, we have to have something unique and something edgy, something that is distinct from and unique to Tokyo. So 17 years from now, towards 2035, we'd like to talk about the city of Tokyo in 2035, and we have 4 committee members to enable us to conduct the more in-depth discussion on this particular topic. So we would like to call upon the 4 members of the committee to come up to the stage, please. So these are the members. So Professor Saskia Sassen, Professor Richard Vender, Mr. Alan Scott, and Mr. Nijkamp, and Professor Ichikawa, please.
So let's begin the panel discussion. First of all, let me introduce the speakers. Professor Ichikawa from the right. And Professor Peter Nijkamp, fellow of Tinbergen Institute. Professor Alan Scott, Distinguished Research Professor of Public Policy and Geography, University of California, Los Angeles. Professor Richard Vender, Professor Emeritus of the Architecture College of Environmental Design, University of California, Berkeley. Professor Saskia Sassen, the member of the Committee on Global Thought, Columbia University. The moderator will be Professor Takenaka. Takenaka-san, please. Thank you very much. How did you like Professor Ichikawa's presentation? I'm sure you have your own impressions. But since we have wonderful panelists with us, they are the world-class authorities in their given fields. But we have to finish in 40 minutes, so probably running out of time. But let's proceed with the panel discussion. We have discussion topics at the very top. Urban vision is included. Do you see any changes in the goals of the urban visions in the last few decades? What is your opinion on Tokyo's uniqueness and weakness from global perspectives? And what roles should the public and private sectors take to realize successful urban transformation? Those are the 3 questions. We don't have much time, so please bear this in mind, and let's have free discussions. Based on the presentation that was just made, let's talk about the future. We'll have a free discussion. So I would like to ask Professor Sassen to start. What is your impression?
Well, this was a very impressive possibility. And I want to emphasize possibility. We know that for decades, starting like 100 years ago, we have had visions where all the existing advanced technologies, which were quite different 100 years ago from what they are now, would somehow be implemented in cities. Now, I think that a city like Tokyo is far more likely to succeed in implementing at least some of that than a city like New York, which is organized very differently and where particular interests rule. So I do think that when you touch this type of subject, how do we bring into urban space, with all its different moments, if you want, home, public, transport, fun, etc. How do you manage to do that? Well, you need extraordinarily powerful, effective, and knowledgeable people who can actually manage the city and who have the power to persuade. I thought something was happening, that somebody didn't like what I was talking about, but no, I think I survived that one. And that is, of course, a challenge, I would say, in most cities. Now, I can imagine Shanghai, I can imagine Singapore, I can imagine Tokyo could succeed in implementing some of that. So that's one point. How long can I talk? My problem is I talk too much. Do I have a bit more time? Or should I end?
1 more minute.
1 more minute. That's very nice of you. I like that. And then the second point, I think that in some ways these images had to do with pleasure more than addressing urgent challenges. I think we're more likely, I'm afraid, to succeed in the zone of pleasure than, and I'm again thinking of a city like New York, for instance, than in the zone of necessity, of needs, of urgent conditions. I've been very impressed with how Tokyo has handled, often in invisible ways, the challenges that it confronts, the earthquakes, etc. That is something that your city is very good at, and in New York City it just wouldn't happen somehow. So I do think that when we look across the world at the global cities, the regimes that guide them vary sufficiently to create a whole set of questions that are going to be specific to each city. But thank you very much. This was really quite formidable.
はい、ありがとうございます。これをどのように
Thank you very much, Professor Sassen. So there are the process aspect and also some of the difficulties associated with implementing some of the ideas. And we already had such a discussion during the brainstorming in advance. And I would like how about Professor Bender, please?
I'm going to pick up on the issue of pleasure because it's an enormous pleasure to be here. But in a bigger sense than that. I came to Tokyo for the first time, really, in the 1980s, and we went to look at Fumihiko Maki's spiral building.
Oh, right.
It was a modern wonder here.
Yeah.
And as we walked through the streets, we would take notice that we saw some foreign people. And people said, well, this is a pretty foreign district. But you won't see so many foreign people if you're anywhere else. Over the years, I've seen the transformation. I saw the transformation of this place from an old residential area to this project. I remember when we came originally, one of the things that was most spectacular that we used to show everyone was not just that there was a restaurant on the roof of a tall building, but in Shinjuku there were 3 or 4 towers in which the top 5 floors were shops, restaurants, and the bottom floors were not just the bottom floors, but restaurants went up to the 5th or 6th floor. And when I first spoke to President Minoru Mori about his projections for the future, he talked about a vertical green city. And that's what I'm missing in these images. The vertical's there, but it's not there for living yet. It's there for apartments. I've heard so much talk in the last days about Singapore doesn't have enough space. So there is a potential space that Mr. Mori saw in a vertical plane that's not just more apartments or office building. The vision of Tokyo with all that life in the middle of the night on the top of these buildings lit up is something I didn't feel in these visions. And if I was looking for what I'd say is, my experience tells me as I walk through the city, I don't need statistics. This is a global city, and it's one of the great global cities. But for the future, I'm looking for it to explore that vertical dimension that I enjoy talking with Minoru Mori about. Thanks.
はい、はい、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. You talked about 1980, and the vertical concept was commented on. The vertical concept is very interesting. Scott-san, please.
Scott-san, お願いします。
Sorry. I was daydreaming. Let me try and deal in a very general way with this first question. Do you see any changes in the goals of urban visions in the last few decades? We can come to the other questions later on. Urban visions are never sort of free-floating. Urban visions always have a relationship to concrete historical and urban realities. And in order to understand the sort of urban reality that we're in today, in a very general sense, you have to understand what is going on in society more generally. If you think of it that way, you could think there are three big historical waves in capitalism, generally. 19th century, the factory and workshop system, a strongly developed working class, and the cities that generated, and the visions, both in favor of this and in opposition to this, that came in the 19th century, in the first wave. Then in the second wave. The second wave is one of mass production, the machine age, and the forms of urbanization, represented in particular by the large mass production metropolises of North America and Western Europe, like Detroit being the classical example. That also gave rise to various sorts of dreams and visions and forms of opposition. The world we're in today, the third wave of capitalism, the third wave of urbanization in relationship to that wider contextual situation, is one in which there is this increasing convergence, where the mechanical is disappearing and the imperatives of the machine age are disappearing, if they have not already disappeared. And we are now in an age of the convergence between technology on the one hand, digital technology on the one hand, and cognition and culture on the other hand. And this convergence of technology, culture, and cognition is what is driving the new forms, fundamentally driving the new forms of urbanization, from the urban economy outwards into the re-stratification of urban society and all the things that go with that. So that if we are to build a viable urban vision for today, for cities for today, for Tokyo and for every other city, it has to be some version of this new order of capitalist development, whether it's in the area of services like financial and business services, or entertainment, or high technology industry, or software, or robotization and the uses of robotization in cities. This is where the dog is buried, so to speak. And Tokyo is already well advanced down the path of this third wave. But there are many other cities, not only in North America and Western Europe, but now in Asia, that are also rising as important competitors to Tokyo in this third wave. And so a very important question is, how will Tokyo deal with this competition?
はい、ありがとうございます。東京のビジョンを考えるにあたって
Thank you very much. So as we consider the vision for Tokyo, well, we have to consider that within the broader context, like and the next, the Professor Nijkamp, please.
What makes Tokyo unique? That was one of the major questions. When I, just like Richard Bender was here in the beginning of the 80s, I asked one of my colleagues, can you show me the most important landmarks in Tokyo? And he said there are only two. There's the Imperial Palace and there's Tokyo Tower. Now I can assure you Tokyo cannot survive only on the Imperial Palace nor on Tokyo Tower. I also asked by then, are there other specific cultural elements which make Tokyo unique? And he said, well, first there is ikebana, so flower arrangement on the one hand, and there is tea ceremonies, which is unique in the world, so it's very nice. Well, if you look at Tokyo nowadays, it has changed. Tokyo Tower is nothing special. Imperial Palace will be there forever. Flower arrangement you hardly find, but it could be an interesting cultural, historical tradition, which would attract many more people, coming from a country where flower production and enjoyment is a landmark. I think that certainly could be interesting. And that, of course, prompts the question, what makes Tokyo unique? Unique means it has features which are different from other cities in Japan and other cities in Asia, maybe other cities in the world. And I'm not so sure that this was emphasized in the fantastic future pictures we have seen for 2055, very nice advanced technology. By the way, many other cities are developing similar types of visual images. But I think I would give the advice Tokyo should more focus on what is indeed its unique characteristic element. That's my first observation. Second, if I look into these future images, they are very nice. Drones and many other things, really beautiful. But the lifestyle is still very traditional. People going to work, people buying clothes, people sitting together in a park. Traditional lifestyles as we have them also nowadays. Is that the future of any city in the world? Is that the future of Tokyo? Or might there be different types of lifestyles in the future which would require totally different types of technologies? Together with my colleague Rima Kutit, recently we have been writing about what we have called the invisible cities. If you look into the interaction pattern, not of the older generation, but the younger generation nowadays, they have more intensive contact patterns with people all over the country, all over the world, than with their own locals. So if cities are characterized by social communication and interaction, then the city for a young person nowadays is not the locality, it's the world. It's a networked, visual, and sometimes immaterial world, intangible, and what we have called sometimes the invisible city. That might require totally different types of views on cities, building of cities, technologies for cities, and so on. And that has implications for maybe entertainment, theaters. We can easily enjoy in the future a theater in Broadway while sitting at home. So we get different types of interaction and recreational patterns, and that would be interesting, and I would certainly recommend also our friends from the Mori Memorial Foundation to look, and for the Institute for Strategic Studies, to look further into these new types of interaction patterns. And finally, third remark, Tokyo, beautiful place, I've been here so many times in my life, but the vision we have seen of Tokyo means Tokyo is seen as an island. The third ring around Tokyo is the maximum action radius of Tokyo, and then the world stops. But the world does not stop with the third ring of Tokyo. Tokyo is linked to other Japanese cities, through Shinkansen and maglev systems in the future, etc. Asian cities. And I was wondering how much in the future vision on Tokyo, not only in 2035, that's around the corner, but a little bit further, how much the future of Tokyo is determined by the developments in other Asian countries and cities. It cannot be that the future of Tokyo is independent of the rapid rise of Shanghai, Beijing, in the future Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, it doesn't matter, and in the future even more, many other global cities. So I think I very much enjoy these future patterns, but I would also call attention for a broader perspective.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. To widen the scope, and also the concept of invisible city was introduced. And the cities should connect to mega regions as well as connectivity to the global cities was mentioned. Very deep and diverse comments were introduced. Ichikawa-san, can you respond? I was very much stimulated by what was discussed. I think there are three issues important for cities. First is that cities are aiming for utopia. And cities were developed to realize the ideal. And there was industrial revolution that occurred, and the urban activities became more significant, and also it brought about issues in terms of the urban environment, leading to the second phase, cities becoming larger, and this will bring about urban problems that must be resolved. And this is continuing for a very long time. Cities like Tokyo has been struggling to overcome the urban problems in the post-war period. So it was always a process of thinking about how to overcome these issues. Now in the third phase, we are now in the third phase. My image is that in the second phase, the resolution of the urban problems have made progress for Tokyo as well as other cities as well. And the example of Tokyo is that city management is outstanding compared to other cities, because if you look at the traffic congestions in Tokyo, we are better compared to London as well as New York. Of course, we have rush hours, but everything is proceeding in an orderly manner. So urban management is where we are doing a good job. But now, at this third phase, we have to rethink the city of the future. What has been driving the city development used to be manufacturing, but now it's changed to the tertiary industry. And with further globalization, there will be competition amongst the cities. Then this is a good opportunity to think about the future of the city. It's the opportune time for Tokyo to think about this. Although there are problems, but the resolving of the problems has run its course. So we have to think about the reason for existence. Now, the existence of Tokyo must be fully considered in the context of competition with other cities in the world as well. We have to think very seriously about this.
Thank you very much. So the urban issues have already been solved almost. And when I was young, I read about the city management of the United States. And what was different between U.S. and Japan is that always the urban poverty was the topic focused on. However, back in those days, there was no issue like the urban poverty. However, probably that will be a new issue that we have to face in Tokyo as well. Well, actually, we have another session, which is the second part of the session. That is where we are going to discuss this particular topic. So in the remaining time, since Mr. Ichikawa mentioned that Tokyo is sophisticated, but it is not edgy enough. That's the expression. So how edgy we should be in Tokyo? So this is related to weakness and the strengths of Tokyo as well. So what kind of the distinct uniqueness, edginess? Well, that is also related to how to position Tokyo in the global picture. So if you have any idea, I would like to listen to your views. So Professor Benda, do you have any comment? Yes, please.
I was taken by the invisible city. The thing about the invisible city is you can't see it. And it's here. This meeting is taking place on the 49th floor. Above us, we have an international university. Around us, an international museum. At night, it's a beacon of culture, 50 stories up in the air. The culture doesn't stop at the boundaries. Stop at the coffee shop at the base of the office building and listen to the conversations. Most of all, go down the street to the bookstore on the corner between here and International House. Look who's there and look at the life they're leading. That's the future. And I think one of the issues in this study has been everyone is so busy measuring all over. The Japanese, in their modesty, haven't taken the positive things of what they've done in actually leading globalism in many ways. It's one of the most friendly places to globalism, one of the best examples of it. And I think one of the things to do is to sort of look at yourselves and see how much of what you're doing here and throughout the building and around it is a mark to the future.
はい、ありがとうございます。サッセン先生、お願いします。
Professor Sassen.
That there are zones, and I don't mean zones just simply as a spatial moment, but worlds that are extraordinarily edgy. And a lot of it has to do with design. A lot of it has to do with truly different, say, from traditional Western modes of understanding something that is exciting. I mean, you have, when you think of what are some of, whether it is in architecture, in clothing design, in these comics, in electronic games, I think Tokyo contains, and Japan, of course, contains a world of innovations and a kind of experimental engagement. And secondly, a level of complexity that is way beyond what I see, for instance, in New York, where most of the people are basically, in very elementary ways, engaging the digital. Here, I mean, imaginations that explode. And then you have very dark zones. We know that too, right? But they're terrifying. They're not just simply, nasty. They're terrifying. So, and one question now, third point, since we're running out of time, I know. Third point that I would like to put on and it comes to your second question there is, what is it that Tokyo or Japan gives the globalizing world that other cities do not have? And I think there are issues of design, of culture, of taste. Think of clothing designers, think of architects. I mean, there is an extraordinary world. So I actually found what we saw in the film. It underplays the depth, the complexity, and the darkness. And I mean darkness in a positive sense, because our world and we humans are not innocent. We're very complex beings. And the way that Japanese culture has managed to create an aesthetic around that, rather than just a denigration. I don't know how a denigration is sort of a lowering. I mean, and so Japan can give the world certain elements. And the other question that I would then have on the reverse is, what does Tokyo take in well? Not just taking it in despair, but taking it in well from other parts of the world. And there, my experience is that they always make it their own. Like fashions, Western style fashions, they'll add something to it that makes it Japanese, or whatever. So, anyhow, more to be said. But I think that is not present in the film. It's just not there. It's like everybody's innocent and pure and silly. And that is not this city. So I think that, I'm a bit brutal. I know, I'm Dutch. We do that, huh? But, right. So there we go.
ありがとうございます。ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for the comment. Yes, some of the comments were very sharp, but still, both the Professor Bender and Professor Sassen, if there are some common elements in their comments, well, the way we are today, maybe edgy in some sense. So the Professor Scott, please.
Well, when you think of Tokyo, when from North America and Western Europe think of Tokyo, of course, it has a very strong identity, or to use a more current language, it has a brand. And this brand is very, very strong. If you ask people around the world, what does the word Tokyo bring to mind, you will get a whole series of very explicit responses to that. But this brand, or this image or identity, was, I think, particularly strong, and Tokyo, within the context of Asia, Tokyo stood out particularly strongly in the early years of this third wave that I've spoken about. In the 1980s and the 1990s, when you think of which is the leading city in Asia, you think always Tokyo, leading in terms of technology, in terms of culture, in terms of economy and dynamism. But actually, as the GPCI index itself shows, there are other cities in Asia that are snapping at the heels of Tokyo, precisely on the basis of these variables that I've mentioned. You think of Beijing, you think of Bangkok, you think of Seoul. These also now are cities in Asia that have a distinctively Asian flavor that is being globalized very extensively. And so for Tokyo, the problem is not to rest on its laurels, not to rest, and in a sense, the animated film we saw just carries forward that sense that we've had for such a long time, for several decades, of what Tokyo is and where Tokyo is going, an advanced technological culture. But what differentiates it competitively as a global center of technology and culture, now from the other rising stars of Eastern and Southern Asia. And that requires a great deal of new thinking, not only in terms of urban planning and how you build infrastructures for this kind of development, but also institution building. What are the institutional imperatives that are required in order to develop and grow and push forward in this respect? And here I'm just going to briefly touch on question 3, because there is something else in this third wave that is extremely important for everything I've been saying, and that is that cities are becoming more and more a commons, if you understand that term. It's a term that's become very fashionable in recent years. That is to say, there is a domain of the private and there is a domain of the public, and this domain of the public is becoming greater and greater and greater in the contemporary world, and being driven, of course, to a very significant extent by these new technologies themselves. And this means that the question of institution building in cities and in society generally has to take into account the new imperatives of social organization and social and economic development in a world which is becoming, and in an urban world, which is becoming more and more and more public, and where, to coin a phrase, the sharing aspect of society becomes more and more and more intense. So how do you build on that? How do you exploit it? How do you push it forward in order to enhance the competitive advantages of Tokyo and its future development?
はい、ありがとうございます。新しい
Thank you very much. You talked about the new institution and sharing the details thereof is something we are very interested in. I'm sure we can have deeper discussions on that. And Professor Nijkamp, please.
To illustrate the views of my predecessors here around the table, I'll start with a very small anecdote. Once upon a time in Tokyo, there were two hairdressers in the same street, providing equally important and also equal services. One day, hairdresser number 1 puts an advertisement in all the Tokyo newspapers and says, "Come to me, I'm the best hairdresser of Japan." Okay. The second hairdresser is totally confused because how can you compete with the best hairdresser in Japan? The next day, he also puts an advertisement in all the newspapers in Japan. And he says, "Please come to me. I'm the best hairdresser in the street." So this is a matter of scaling, and this is also what makes it important for Tokyo. What is the playing field in which Tokyo wants to operate? You can be the best in the country, you can be the best in the province, in the prefecture, you can be the best in Asia. But to be the best means you have to have a distinguishing feature which makes you in any case better than somewhere else. Saskia Sassen has given, sometimes referred to the example of New York. You can criticize New York, but New York has a character. I hate New York, by the way. I try to avoid it. Yeah? But it has a character. I love more cities like New Orleans, which has certainly a character. I like cities like Boston with a European flavor, like Washington, D.C., with many cultural amenities, etc. But they all have distinct characters. The same for cities in other places of the world. Amsterdam has a totally different character compared to Paris or London. And these cities, again, have completely different characters compared to Jerusalem. But they all have distinct characters. You can immediately pinpoint, if you say Jerusalem, you know what it means, even when you cannot precisely describe it, but it means something. If we would have to define what is the distinguishing feature of Tokyo compared to other cities like Osaka and other cities in Asia, it's not so easy to define. Even though I have to tell you, I feel very much comfortable in Tokyo all the time. It's well organized, fantastic food, nice shopping areas. But if I don't like food and if I don't like to shop, what else can I do in Tokyo? So you have to provide services for extravagant people like me who have different preferences compared maybe to others. But that's in fact the way you would have to look into the future. The French sociologist, urban sociologist Foucault has once called this the phenomenon of what he called heterotopia. Heterotopia is a place, which is an urban place, but it has a different distinguishing character compared to others. And I would suggest that also our friends here in Tokyo, in comparison to other cities, would take this as a challenge, look into what is the heterotopia, the different place in Tokyo. And of course you might say, well, we have to look into private spaces, public spaces, as Alan Scott also has mentioned. I think that is important. But again, I would argue the new generation is completely different from the existing current generation. I like to go to a nice city park, the Imperial Park and many other places, and like to enjoy a stroll along some streets, etc. But most of the younger generation, their public space is not the street or a park, it's the virtual space in which they play with a computer and with their iPhone. There's a completely different type of public space. And somehow, modern cities have to look into the question, what is the relationship between the traditional public space, which is a matter of public governance and sharing places in a shared economy, compared to a free space, somewhere a cyberspace, which belongs to us all and increasingly will be the place where especially the new generations are going to live and to work, to entertain. And this is not only a problem of Tokyo, I realize that, that's a general problem, but I think if we would share our opinions on that type of new vision, that could be fantastic for the future of our world.
ありがとうございます。本当に
Thank you very much. So we have the diverse value, sense of value, and we also have many technologies available to us. So how the cities can be diversified and become unique. So it was a very comprehensive discussion and raised by the 4 leading experts. Now, based upon the input by the 4 leading experts, I would like to ask Professor Ichikawa to summarize so far. Well, I spent the fewer the time on the presentation so far, so maybe I have 5 more minutes. So whether the Tokyo is unique enough or edgy enough or not on that particular point. Yes, well, all of you know about Tokyo. So your understanding about Tokyo is deeper, but as for other general population, they don't know much about Tokyo, first of all. And sometimes Tokyo, even the native, the residents of Tokyo cannot identify what is unique about us. And as Professor Sassen mentioned, that even if something is brought in from overseas to Tokyo, we tend to switch it or turn it into something more Japanesey or the Tokyo.
それでですね。
So having heard the presentations and the comments by all the experts, of course, well, we always think that we want to be unique, and there should be something special about Tokyo. But historically speaking, well, our culture starts from learning from others, and after Meiji Restoration, actually we mimicked Paris, and then after that, we tried to learn from London for the city planning. And then after the war, we try to emulate the New York City or the London and other European cities. So what will happen from now on? Well, so we have to start creating our own city, not to emulate other cities. So, and I only have about 5 minutes, and I wanted to be short. But we have technologies and we have culture. So with that in our hands, what shall we do and what shall we create? The city of Tokyo. So maybe we can create Tokyo without having any specific uniqueness, because there are certain neighborhoods within Tokyo that are each of them are quite unique and edgy in a sense. So but it would be easier for people if we can create a uniqueness that is common in Tokyo. Well, one scenario is that we can raise this the edginess and also the uniqueness of Tokyo, which is good. But at the same time, we are going to have the city-related issues like the urban poverty. So the direction, well, we have to fully understand which direction we should look at. And that is how I feel about the city planning and development of Tokyo. Thank you very much. So so far, we identified one direction and one image, and they welcome the different inputs from different the experts. So these are the topics and how the public and the private can work together. What kind of the processes they are to be employed. We haven't gone into that level of discussion. So in part 2, we will be speaking more specifically about the city ranking, talking about the weakness and strengths of Tokyo, and hope to have some kind of the summary of the discussion for part 1 and part 2 together. Probably some of you in the audience may want to ask questions, or they may feel a little uncomfortable because they want to ask questions. So we'd like to set aside some time for QA session at the end of a second part. But please, we would like to complete the first part and take a rest, and would like to have the second part. Thank you very much.
スピーカーの皆様どうもありがとうございます。
So speakers and the distinguished experts, thank you very much, and please go back to your seats. Thank you very much for the participation. Now,
皆様お待たせいたしました。
Thank you very much for waiting. We'd like to resume the session.
At the outset, I would like to invite Professor Ichikawa to provide a presentation on Tokyo 2035 strategy. Over to you, Professor Ichikawa, please. Now let me begin the second half of this session about the strength of Tokyo. I'll talk about Tokyo strength. Yesterday, GPCI ranking 2017 was announced. And if you look at the world map, you see all of the metropolitan activities. As you can see, about all of Japan is lit up. Out of this, we will try to understand what the strength of each cities are. That's how we have come up with GPCI. And GPCI is made up of 6 major aspects: economy, R&D, cultural interaction, and so forth. There are 7 indices that's used. And the scope of this survey is 44 cities around the world. Compared to other surveys, there are more Asian cities represented. And we have begun with 35, and now we have 44 cities. And within this, what is the strength of Tokyo? And last year in GPCI 2016, we were ranked number 3. And this year, again, we have managed to maintain the 3rd place. And it's not just the order, but what's more important is the score itself. And as you would see from here, the top 4 cities, the order is different, but the members are the same, from London to Paris, and Singapore is the runner-up, and other Asian cities and European cities are included. They are always among the top 10. And looking at the score of Tokyo, the top 5 scores, it's represented here. It's shown on this slide. This is how it looks like for London, Tokyo, Paris. And the Brexit impact is not yet included here in London, so it's too strong. Paris is a bit down. And within this, where is Tokyo situated? And since 2015, Tokyo's strength has been coming up, gaining more strength. And in September in 2013, Tokyo Olympic was determined, and since then, from 2014, people have begun to place focus on Tokyo. Because of that, the strength is coming up, and we're now getting closer to New York. And if this pace continues, then within 1 or 2 years' time, there is going to be a fierce competition between New York and Tokyo, and this result was also announced in the paper today. And on the radars chart, this is the strength of Tokyo. The strength and weakness is shown here. In cultural interaction, we're weaker. So though we do have a overall strength, there are some weaknesses to be overcome. And as for London, what is their strength? London is strong in all of those aspects, in all of the dimensions. In Tokyo, cultural interaction, we are weaker, but in Paris, they are stronger. That's a major difference. And as for the accessibility for the airport, accessibility, London is stronger than Tokyo. And we always share the strength and weaknesses of Tokyo. And on the right-hand side, this shows the weakness. On the left-hand side, this shows the strength, like the economy and also the living cost and environment and the accessibility, the international networking. There is weakness there. If we can overcome those weaknesses, our strength will go up. But this is something we have been talking about in the past decade. There has been some changes, but overall, the trend is the same. And looking at Tokyo and looking at other cities, we have conducted a city perception survey about the images of each city. And those are the cities that were surveyed. And to the residents of those cities, we have asked them what the impressions of the cities are. London, New York, Tokyo, Paris, Singapore, Seoul, Hong Kong, and Shanghai were the cities that were surveyed, the top 4 cities plus Asian cities. And we have used 17 languages to conduct this survey. And we have placed one-word questions. And in London, for London, people have said it's an expensive city. And then came history, Big Ben, culture, rain. Those were the words that the people had come up with when they think about London. And then when it comes to New York, busy was the first word that came up. Skyscrapers, all of the buildings, and then the Statue of Liberty. So it's the power of New York, I think, that is represented in those words. And then what about Paris? It's entirely different. It's romantic. There's the Eiffel Tower. It's beautiful. It's entirely different from other cities. It's also fashionable. There is love. There is culture, art. All kinds of words pop up. So things are different from Tokyo, New York, London. And now how about Tokyo? The first word that came was crowded. The cities of this magnitude cannot be found anywhere. We have 13.6 million people living in Tokyo. And if you include the vicinities, it's 37 million. So it's a huge city. And then the second word is a technology. And then modern is another word. Japan, of course, it's Japan. And then busy. Looking at those words, they differ from one country to another. The European people have said Tokyo is crowded, technology, and modern, whereas the Asian people have said Tokyo is about fashion and advanced. Those are the answers we gained from Asian respondents. And for those people who have visited Japan and for those who have never come to Japan, the answers have differed. For those people who have ever visited Japan, they have said Tokyo is polite, they are safe, very clean and organized. Everything is orderly and fashion. On the other hand, for those people who have never visited Tokyo, they have said it's far, we're in the Far East, and they talk about manga, the comics are stressful, and pollution, and noise, and crowded. All of those negative images about a metropolitan city is something that they have thought about. We have 4 people from overseas, and they are already familiar with Tokyo, so they had thought Tokyo is edgy and so forth, but the image differs entirely whether you have come to Tokyo or whether you have not come to Tokyo. So the one challenge for us is to get the people to come as a first starting point. And once you come, you would come to understand the strength of Tokyo. And we have summarized the words like this. New York is in the center, and to the left-hand side, you would see Asian cities like Singapore, Seoul, Shanghai, Tokyo. They're all like crowded cities. It's Asian. And then if you go over to London, it's a little bit away from New York. It's independent and located entirely different from those 3 circles is Paris. Paris is unique. So what is going to happen to Tokyo? And we want to think about the strategy towards the 2035. The government has come up with its vision. For example, they have announced the Growth Strategy 2017. Emeritus, the ministry, has announced the strategies for metropolitan areas. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government has announced New Tokyo, New Tomorrow, and the Urban Development Bureau has announced the Grand Design for Urban Development. And in the case of the government, it's not just about Tokyo, it's for all of Japan still. They have various ideas. And as we have said earlier, one city differs from another. And we need to look at the economy, the industries, and also we need to think about the spaces and environment, and also the living environment of society. Those aspects as a whole would create the image of a city. And as you think further, like in economy and industry, you need to look at the economic growth, industrial structure, the corporations that's resident to the human resources and market. And when you want to think about the space and environment, you need to look at the urban structure. As Professor Sassen has mentioned, there are many worlds. It has multiple cores. It's just Tokyo that would have such a multiple core. That structure, how this is to be developed, and then infrastructure, there's this need for the development. What kind of a development? Are we not overdoing it? That's another question. And then there's a disaster prevention, like in San Francisco and Los Angeles. We need to think about earthquakes, disasters, and eco-friendliness, international networking, and connectivity with the other countries. That's another issue.
And the third is about living in society. As we have discussed, one of them is the cultural values. Cultural values, how to do about it. That's one of the important themes. And another is international interaction, international contact. We have to think about, and community as well. There are a lot of communities. The community traditionally is expanding, but now it's growing vertically. So what kind of community are we talking about? And then safety and security, that's important. And social system is another. Yesterday we talked about open system. Professor Sassen has talked about, and there are a lot of things that how we can deal with. So as we look at those things, when it comes to economy, industry, space and environment, living in society, there are a lot of factors. Out of them, the comprehensive power, the urban power, we talked about GPCI, we put together this correlation chart. On the left-hand side, how are they connected to each other? And as a result, we should be able to measure comprehensive urban power. GPCI does use specific numbers, but behind them, there are a lot of factors. So looking at GPCI once again, there are factors, and then also the functions and indicator group and indicators. And then 2017 GPCI is being announced. And what we can talk about is that looking into 2035, what's going to happen? Look at other Asian major cities. Look at what they are exceeding the Tokyo. Of course, there are strengths and weaknesses. For example, Singapore, they have a lot of strengths that we can learn from. For example, the market, attractiveness, it was 70, but we had to make it to 90, just like Hong Kong. And business environment, Singapore is 44. So we have still a lot of issues that we have to overcome. And by doing so, we should be more powerful in Tokyo, and not just in Asia. We can be unique in the world. So this survey, the GPCI simulation survey, what are the Tokyo's edginess? Within myself, this Tokyo's strength is our edginess. And in doing so, in 2035, as we implement what we have mentioned, Tokyo will be like this. Of course, there are cultural interaction that we have more room to improve, but we should be better. And this is a set of data, and we put, or say, superimpose 2035. We should be #1 in the world. Well, of course, we are actually counting the other things that we have not captured yet, but as we move forward, it's not easy, but we can be #1, and as long as we have a good set of goals, we can do better. And as we look into the future, as we consider those things, whether we can really achieve what we aim for, it's all depend upon us. Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor Ichikawa. You have finished your presentation 5 minutes earlier than scheduled. That was unexpected. But anyway, GPCI, Global Power City Index. Let's take a look at again. In 2008, that was the year of Lehman shock. We've started out And then now we have 44 cities included in this GPCI, and we have this result that was announced yesterday. 36, say, media of the world, including Japan, have talked about this GPCI, and NHK has talked about it in the news session yesterday, and London Times has written about GPCI because London, I'm sure, is #1 again. So it's being talked about, and it is talked about quite a lot these days. So looking into this GPCI and using this, how Tokyo will change and what can we do? Let's talk about specifics. Just like the first part, those are 3 questions that you have to keep in mind as themes of the discussion. The magnetism of global cities. What is the magnetism of cities that we have to talk about? And then, what are the negative things about global cities? Well, we talked about those things in the first part. There's this schism or gap in the city. There are differences between those who have and those who do not have. That's the first theme. And then number 2 is, do you think will the GPCI top 3 cities rankings change in the coming years? Right now, London, New York, and Tokyo is going to be different. And any advice for the future Tokyo to be something edgy? So shall we start with Professor Nijkamp? And listening to Professor Ichikawa, what should Tokyo do and what will be the change that we will see in Tokyo? Will you start with that, with Professor Nijkamp?
All of you have seen this document, the GPCI database for 2017. And I would like to come back to what has been said by Professor Ichikawa. And I've tried to analyze a little bit more in detail the possibilities of Tokyo to reach a #2 position or maybe a #1 position. Now, there are some very interesting details in the function-specific ranking. It's amazing to see that Tokyo is #3 on the list, as we have seen. But if you look into the 6 sub-indicators, the 6 functions, Tokyo is only #3 on the second one, which is R&D. And for all the others, it's #4. It's #14 for livability. It's #12 for environment, and #6 for accessibility. But nevertheless, even when you are scoring lower on 5, but score #3 at 1, you can get to #3. That sounds a little bit contradictory, but it's not, because it means that all the other cities have even more variability in the scores and go even deeper down. So that explains the interesting position of Tokyo, but it means it's not even Tokyo would get to #2, it might even never get any of the position on #2. So that's an interesting observation from the data. Second, can Tokyo surpass or pass New York? If I look again into the differences, then in many cases New York is far higher than Tokyo. There are only two functions where New York is inferior compared to Tokyo, if you call it inferior, i.e. livability and environment. So no one wants to live in New York and everyone wants to live in Tokyo. It's not true, by the way. I'm just teasing Saskia Sassen. But of course, the perception of livability and environment of New York is alarming. I would get very nervous if I would live there. But also Tokyo is not very high on that list. So now you could do 2 things. You could say, well, we want to be the best in all respects. Then you have to invest and make all kinds of plans on all the 6 criteria. That's a big effort, because that requires a lot of public investment. And Tokyo can be rich, but this is, of course, a problem. On the other hand, to overtake New York, don't invest in livability and environment, because you are already better than New York. So that's a contradiction in the figures, of course, but this is the reality as we can observe it from the facts. So I could easily imagine that for international competitiveness, Tokyo tries to get as close as possible to New York, which means invest in economy, in R&D, in cultural interaction, and in accessibility. And all these things, New York is better than Tokyo. And you might say, well, forget about the rest, livability and environment. But you have to do something for the people, because otherwise you would lose residents, right? So in fact, the message I get from this fantastic database, compliments to Professor Ikashima and also to the Mori Memorial Foundation, is to be the best. You have to be almost the best in everything if you are really a global city like Tokyo. That's my message. But there's a lot of investment. And there is one more thing. The aging makes life difficult for Tokyo. I'll just give you one example. Normally we would assume, well, aging society, good pensions, healthy and wealthy aging in aged people. Could be, but in the longer run, of course, the cost of aging could almost be prohibitive. And I'm not so sure whether the pension system in Japan is so luxurious that as soon as you get retirement, that you would still be at the same income level. But that would be a problem for Tokyo. 1/3 of the population as of 2030 is above the age of 67 or 65. If you have many retirees with a sudden drop in their income, it means there's a big problem for the cities, a spending capacity, which will also determine how successful Tokyo will be. And I would be a little bit worried, given what I've seen in terms of the pension systems in Japan. I do not know enough about it, but I see some figures which would not give me so much confidence. I would be a little bit worried. But I'm sure they will solve it.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for worrying about my pensions. You're very kind. Professor Nijkamp had evaluated highly the database and the content of a database. Since we have such rich data, we can come up with a good strategy, and we need to be able to act on that. I think that is most important for us going forward. Now over to you, Professor Scott, please.
Well, if I think of sort of anxieties that might be provoked by these rankings, the least anxious question that I face is, can Tokyo become number 2 or number 1? In a sense, that's really not an interesting question or an important question. I mean, between 1 and 2 and 3, so what? And every city, of course, has its own character and its own magnetism, to use this, this phrase here. A more important question is, what is it that cities, Tokyo specifically, and other large global cities more generally, need to do in order to remain viable and attractive and to offer the citizens a decent standard of life? You know, in 20 or 30 years ago, in 1980s in particular, a number of books and articles appeared saying the city was doomed, that the end of the city was in sight, and that as digital technologies, and in particular digital intercommunication, improve, we'll all move out of the city into little cottages on a mountainside and begin to communicate in this lonely digitized world. Well, the opposite is the case, as a matter of fact. And this gets to this question of magnetism, or to put it in another vocabulary, what I would call localized competitive advantage or agglomeration economies of cities. And what has happened in this third wave that I've spoken about is a profound restructuring economically of the economy, which even as it globalizes and digitizes, also produces intense localization, intense intensely new rounds of urban growth, in contradistinction to the urban crisis of the 1970s, where cities were indeed around in many parts of the world declining. One of the really big questions about this, and by the way, it's also associated with a very profound political shift in the world, which is a shift to neoliberalism, a highly contested neoliberalism, but a shift towards a greater part for the retreat of state apparatuses and the expansion of market arrangements, with all kinds of problematical results for cities. One of the most problematical, and one I think that I can't see it hasn't figured much so far in the discussions here, and it's not really visible too much in the GPCI index, is that one of the consequences of all of these political, technical, and cultural changes over the last few years is this re-stratification of urban society away from the old stratification used to be white collar, blue collar, and that was expressed, of course, also in specific kinds of neighborhoods, particularly in the United States. Now that white collar, blue collar division of labor, but also social division, is evolving into a new kind of series of strata involving what Richard Florida, I don't like the work of Richard Florida, and so I'm reluctantly using his terminology. Am I still on here? Yeah. I'm reluctantly using his technology, but there has been an emergence of what he would call a creative class, what other people would call a cognitive cultural workforce or symbolic analysts, however you express it, this new upper stratum of the labor force, and increasingly a lower stratum, right? And increasingly a division between them. And this lower stratum is a kind of new servile class, as it were, with the lower stratum in this new system of urbanization has the function of providing direct and indirect services to the upper half of the labor force, with many, 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 many problematical outcomes for cities. So the question of the changes in the magnetism of global cities also has to involve, and I would like to hear more from the Tokyo colleagues about this, also has to involve what is happening to class relationships in the city, and how are we dealing or not dealing with the problematical effects of this in urbanization.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. In the first half, we have touched on this about the fragmentation of the division of a society has become a problem for urban cities, and in the future GPCI, we would need to consider ways to incorporate that dimension into future GPCI. Now over to you, Professor Bender, please.
Well, looking at the magnetism, I started to think in one way, and I've come to something else. But let me say, I think one of the things that has deflected people from coming here is communication. For those of us who spent a lot of time here, you can find your way through the signs and maps and subways. But for people all over the world, the idea of coming to Japan is deflected by the sense that I don't know how I'll get around. Once I get beyond central Tokyo, I'm afraid to go to the country without a guide. Even in neighborhoods of Tokyo, I can't speak. And I think for the Olympics, there's a lot of effort being put into doing that, into getting people involved. For me, it's tapped into my other growing area of expertise, and that's being an old person. Everyone's looking at the problem of the old people, No one's looking at the possibility. I live in a world in which most of the people who live around me are retired people. Almost all of them active. Some of them more active and energetic because they're doing now what they want to do than they were before. I don't think, in all the time I've spent in Japan, I found almost everybody has a hobby or a passion underneath that they dream of. I used to see people standing on the street corner waiting for a bus and practicing their golf swing. I've seen people coming out on Sunday with the fishing gear and dressed in baseball costume. And I've seen people taking more activity in politics and things of that sort. And so I think we have to stop looking at this big piece of the population as a dead weight and look at how to enable them. Many of them have another business in them or another occupation in them, and maybe even another way to live in them. And I think very little's been thought about that. They say, well, when you get over 60, we have to find a way to supply some medical services and things. In some ways, having a computer center and someone to translate and bring people up to date in the latest programs and systems would integrate them more. But I think, and I think the fact that the country's doing that and making an example to the world of how to use older people, let them use themselves in a more creative way, will be one of the things people come here to see. So maybe that's where I'd leave it. That I think the aging of such a educated, civilized, civicized, I should say, people active in community life, used to participating with other people. I think it's an enormous opportunity waiting to be used better. I see the beginnings of it in how you're organizing for the Olympics, but I think it could go a lot farther.
May I? Thank you very much, Professor Benda. Here in Japan, the working population is declining, but the working population is the one who are making GDP or the generating GDP. On the other hand, we have more and more people who can use time for themselves, but time-consuming activities, how that can be enjoyed in urban setting. That's another important point. In that sense, Tokyo is very much issue advanced city. I think we can. My impression is that we can rank Tokyo in that manner. So, Professor Sassen?
Great comments, so I just want to build on them. But I also want to start with a question, what part of the global needs a city? Because it's clear that we're dealing right now with a very large number of global cities. It's also clear that there are particular functions that cities can offer these actors. They may be enterprises, they may be governments, they may be cultural centers, etc. And that's really how I started my research way back when, in the 1980s, on the global city. And one language that I like to use, and I hope that it is helpful, is this notion of the global city function. So it is not just the global city, which has all kinds of things. It's also a particular mix of economic conditions, constraints, possibilities, etc. And so here is an image that I want to start with. London, Tokyo, New York, and a whole bunch of other big cities. They were broke. Let's remember that. Tokyo was broke. New York was officially bankrupt. The period we're talking about is the 1970s, which is sort of the end of that prior Keynesian type of economy where cities did not really matter. What mattered was infrastructure at national levels, building suburbs, building roads, and cities were poor. I mean, Tokyo was basically broke. And so then this other history literally installs itself in a limited number of cities at that point and has now advanced. So what is that other history? So if you look at New York, if you look at London, and partly if you look at Tokyo, the dominant actors in these countries' economies were big corporations. These big corporations did most of their stuff in-house because they were national economies that they were servicing. So there was a lot of routinized stuff. When we deregulate, privatize, and globalize, these corporations could no longer satisfy their needs just by hiring everybody in-house. If you were operating in 40 countries and you needed 50 hours of Mongolian accounting, 35 hours of Argentinian investment preferences, you name it, at that point, you cannot do it in-house. Doesn't make sense. You just need 14 hours, 50 hours, 75 hours. And it is at that point, I would argue, that something that in my mind, I always, in very material terms, is like an operational space that installs itself in these cities. And it is an intermediation function. This is something that has been completely lost in all the writing and discussion about globalization and the global city. It's intermediation that counts, because these firms need to buy very specialized services from a vast number of different types of countries, like I said, accounting, law, etc., because they're operating in all of these countries. I'm hoping that the translators are they doing fine? Yes, because it's different language. And that is why you have this expanding, operational space, which is very high income jobs, very fancy firms, not necessarily huge headquarters, but a lot of sort of almost boutiques. That's how it starts out. That is why finance rises. Finance is radically different from traditional banking. The traditional bank sells something it has, money. Fine, for a price. What the financial system does, the financial system constructs new modes of financializing more and more of the economy. They are radically different subjects. And finance takes off, and the traditional bank sort of, becomes a rather mediocre operation. Now, the final element that I want to add to this notion of an operational space that installs itself in these cities is the fact that you need an extraordinary mix of knowledges, and you need people from many different parts of the world. Because the way they would think about the specialized accounting for this or that in Tokyo is going to be different from what they have done in New York, etc. And so you need to sort of amalgamate and find a mode. So there is one, if I come back to my initial question, what is it about the global economy that needs cities? So I'm talking about a very narrow part of what we call globalization, okay? Because there are many other things that are also happening. But I just want to get at this point. What it is, what the cities needed at that point, and what they still need, is an extraordinary mixity of expertise, of all kinds of things. And that is why you have this presence of up to 30%, even 40% of highly paid people in these cities. It's not just the 1% that counts. I'm making a footnote now. All the talk has been about concentration of wealth, the 1%. The 1% has always been there, always in cities, maybe not as rich as they are now. What makes the difference to these cities, and where I find some of the negative effects, is that when 30% of very high income people inhabit those cities, they want a lot of space, etc. That is really felt by the population of a city. Then the firemen, the nurses, the lowly paid teachers, they begin to have trouble living in those cities. So when you think of it in these material terms and the very specialized mixes of knowledges that you need, then you can understand also some of the negatives about this global city function, which we cannot just simply overlook. Where the final little point, separate point, where the positives come in of this global history, you know, that installs, which is a partial history, I repeat, that installs itself in cities. It's stuff that has to do with art, stuff that has to do with certain aspects of the knowledge zone, with experimental, with, you know, multicultural blah blahs, etc. All of that. There is a lot of positive. But at the heart is something else, and that also explains, that difference explains why each global city is different when it comes to that core. When it comes to a lot of other things, the standards for building the luxury museum, the luxury private, you know, apartment building, there's a lot of standardization, but not that knowledge zone. Now, in other words, global cities compete far less with each other than we think. The notion that this is like competing, it's just a mistake, it's an error. If I take the top 100 specialized service firms, they're not operating in 40 cities. They're operating in locations that include over 600 different locations, covering just about, not all countries, but many countries in Africa are not in play here, but they occupy a much broader zone. Why? Because they are forever extracting knowledges, specificities, particular goods that are present in certain places. When we begin to think about it that way, the question of competition it's there, but it's there only for what is routinized. And so I always find, you know, that it's very important to recognize these specialized differences, and that is where a city can really have a very significant role in a network of cities that each have that significant role.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. You have given us a comprehensive view in this about this issue. But basically, depending on the time, the companies which have to solve were different, and then the cities have different issues. So there are competitions, and there are harmonies, and there are differentiations, and we have to really cover negatively and positively. And thank you very much, people in this room. I'm sure you don't have much time, but we like to hear from you. We like to hear your questions. So please be succinct, and please make sure who you are asking your question. And then please wait for the microphone before you utter your question. So let's have questions from the floor. And there's somebody who's in the second row who's trying to get our attention, Professor Kurokawa.
言いたいですよね。
I know you want to say something, Professor Kurokawa. Simply put, it's been a presentation of beautiful different views, and there's a question, why do we have to be number one? It's something we need to think about. If that becomes our ultimate goal, that's not right. I appreciate the diverse expertise. And also, looking at the local issues, we have heard wonderful comments. So when we talk about the future of Tokyo, I think there are many ways to think of this. Thank you very much. The ranking, we talk about number one, number two, number three. We are not competing for that place per se. We need to think about its specificity, and we need to understand areas where it needs improvement. For that purpose, this ranking is developed. So that's the way we want to utilize that. The materials about this ranking is available in the yearbook, which is, I think, issued in January. It's a big data book that's issued in January. So if you could utilize this booklet, maybe one. Anyone else? Any comments, any questions from the floor? Over to that side, please.
João Romão. I'm from Portugal and I work at Hokkaido University. Normally I work in tourism studies and regional economics, and I also had a look at the data of this index about number of tourists. And among the 5 cities where tourism has grown more, there are 3 Japanese cities, Tokyo, Osaka, and Fukuoka. So there is a big growth of tourism. I think it's also in accordance with the strategies for development in Japan. Tourism is a core sector. And tourism in cities is also a core element, I think. But all these presentations, I never heard the word tourism, tourists, visitors, this kind of thing. And I found a bit surprising, because not only with the Olympics and all the expectations about tourism development in Japan, this requires a lot of infrastructure, skills, people, facilities, but also problems, housing problems, new processes of stratification in the cities, as Professor Alan Scott mentioned. So how do you frame this question? And just 50 cents for that discussion about uniqueness. Tokyo was the only city, as far as I perceived, where tradition and modern appear at the same time as characteristics recognized by the people. Thank you.
That's good. はい、ありがとうございます。先ほど時間の
Thank you very much. Due to time constraints, some comments were skipped about the tourism. There was transportation, accessibility, and cultural interaction within that. There are some indicators that had looked into the business of tourism. Within our culture and interaction, we have looked at tourism, and we have been looking at the destination and the purpose of the visits and the facilities around it. The numbers of hotels have been surveyed. Instead of thinking about the policies, we wanted to understand what is actually happening in the numbers. So tourism is a major issue within GPCI, and also the accessibility in those locations. That's another important factor. Tokyo, Osaka, Fukuoka, the score had gone up, but also because of the Olympics, and some ramifications were felt in Osaka and Fukuoka. And they needed to make preparations for something, and in Tokyo we had the motivation to prepare for the Olympics, and as a result of that, there is more emphasis placed on tourism. And if you look at the GPCI, the data, you would find it there. The accessibility and the hotels, if you could talk about the hotels as well in Japan, especially in Tokyo, there's a weakness. We do the 5-star hotels. We have a very small number of 5-star hotels in Tokyo, and we have not yet seen the increase. There are rooms, however, as you go up the higher floors, we have less number of hotels in the higher levels. Here we have the Grand Hyatt. It's kind of an exceptional. If we want to be stronger, I think we need to increase this, and also international flights, there is an increase in that. So we are now beginning to solve those. Since time is limited, we would like to take one comment from all of the speakers on the podium, maybe 1 minute from each speaker. So going forward, how Tokyo can be made better for the future, if we could give us a 1-minute message from each one of you.
I think that in many ways Tokyo is already doing okay. I think I'm very impressed with this city, but probably avoiding these extremely long hours of work, you know, there have been some incidents, would be a good start, I would say. And yeah, I mean, I think that is the biggest concern I would have if I were in charge of the city, is this excessive. Right. I gave you my complicated story already, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I would, yes.
Thank you very much. Professor Benda?
Well, I would say look more to yourself for what you've been doing, and not always so desperately looking at outsiders to tell you something new. I've seen the hours in the years since I've been working here. It went from working half a day on Saturday to taking off half an occasional Friday afternoon. I've seen all kinds of things change. When I came here, almost no office I visited had women who were in anything more than tea in secretarial positions, and now it's much higher. And I would look at that not as something just to shrug off, but to appreciate that you are changing, and looking for radical changes in other directions may make you less good at what you're strong at.
Yeah. Yes, Professor Scott.
I really have nothing to add substantively to what I have already said. Let me just say one thing. If ever Tokyo becomes number one, nobody is ever going to believe the GPCI index again. Because, of course, it's made in Japan. So perhaps your best strategy is to remain number 3 permanently and to retain your legitimacy as a scientific organization.
That's a wonderful strategy. Nijkamp?
When you enter the University College in London, UCL, you see a big statue, the statue of Jeremy Bentham, one of the philosophers in economics more than 200 years ago. He made one important statement: the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. People at that time thought happiness is a strange concept, and economists even took it totally wrong by saying, well, we do not want to have happiness, we talk about utility, which is even more complicated. What we see nowadays is also in studies on urbanistics and urban sciences and urban sociology, and Saskia knows much better than I do, there's a lot of studies on urban happiness. Not only philosophical, but in a quantitative sense. There's a totally new strand of literature. Now, what I would like to have is whether somehow these new emerging studies on urban happiness and urban satisfaction, urban quality of life and what have you, how this could be related to the GPCI database. Is it true that if you are number 3 on the list, that also in the world ranking list of happiness, that also the people in Tokyo are not number 1 or 2, but at least number 3? And is it true that people in New York are the one but most happy people in the world? And is it true that people in London are the happiest people? I doubt it, by the way. But this could be verified. Now, if I just make a final remark, what would make Japanese people happy? I could also look at it from a different perspective. If I look into where Japanese people are living in the Netherlands, that might also be somewhat illustrative of their preferences and maybe their feelings of happiness. He would say, well, Tokyo is density, it's crowdedness. We have shown all the jargon about Tokyo. But we have quite a few Japanese, highly respected people, residents in the Netherlands. And they are all concentrated almost in one and the same area. That is an area which has a low density, which has a lot of green, which has a Japanese school, which has many cultural and sports facilities. That's not in Amsterdam, that's a suburb of Amsterdam, Amstelveen, where you find more than 2,000 Japanese citizens, highly respected, highly qualified, and providing a fantastic contribution. That is what makes them happy and what makes also the people in the Netherlands happy. And if I would extrapolate from that, then I would say, well, perhaps lower densities, more green facilities, more leisure time facilities in a nice environment is something which I would extrapolate would be highly appreciated also by the people in Tokyo. That would be my lesson.
Thank you very much, Professor Ichikawa. I like to say several things. One thing that stands out is, what is happiness, as Professor Nijkamp said? In the world, there's a happiness index. Yes, there is a happiness index in the world. As you have said, in order for Tokyo to be number 1, that is not why we are doing GPCI. It is just a benchmark. We like to see. Maybe it's good to be criticized if we are number 1. We can make a conversation. In order to start a conversation, we need this kind of in GPCI. And if our ranking goes up, a lot of media will talk about it. people will get interested in it. And if Tokyo becomes number one, people will talk about it. And then people should start thinking why we are number one. This kind of index is really important as benchmark, because the urban space is really a place of, say, various things. Of course, some people want greens, more greens, but some people may not. So there is no only one answer. But what is important to be number one, well, what is important is that to be the city that people of the world get interested, want to see. And so we have to have uniqueness in one way or the other. If we can be the center of maybe culture or center of something, it is meaningful. But individuals do have different views. It should be diversified. But as a total, it can be a good city for everybody. But another thing that is important, as the city becomes richer, there will be poorer things, poor sector. What should we do? Only the policy can solve that kind of, say, economic gap. I think global city magnetism, that is what is important. We have to do the trial and error process, and there people will criticize that, but we want to look into that. GPCI has that kind of some value in getting attention. Thank you very much for your comment. Can I summarize it? Once again. So we'd like to ask once again to Professor Heizo Takenaka, who is the chairman of this Urban Strategy Institute, to summarize what we have discussed. Thank you very much. I'm not a panelist, so I shouldn't be making comments. That's why I didn't talk much about it. But as Professor Ichikawa said, and Professor Kurokawa has pointed out as well, so this ranking is really a mirror to see yourself. I am myself. You are yourself. Tokyo is different from New York. I can look at myself in a mirror. Am I growing in size, getting fat? Am I different from others? Is there anything that I can change to improve? This is a mirror to improve ourselves. GPCI is an index. It is just a mirror to see yourself. So if I dare to say, if we want to be number one, there are 3 things. Well, actually, there are 4 things we can do. One is that Tokyo has too much corporate tax. That's too high a corporate tax. And now it is 35%. It's going down to 30%. But in the United States, under President Trump, it's going to be 25%. And Hong Kong is saying that's going to go down to 12%. When you think about this corporate tax, Tokyo has to decrease or reduce the corporate tax. And the accessibility to the international airports, it has improved a lot, but still, Tokyo to Haneda, Tokyo to Narita, and there are only 120 to 130 cities in the world which are connected, but Heathrow has more than 300, I believe, and then we have to think about deregulation as well. Deregulation, lower corporate tax, and accessibility, those 3 things are very important. If we make it just as good as Singapore or Hong Kong, we can be number one. And another thing is about the cultural interaction. And this cultural interaction can actually be discussed in a different way from other things. Meaning that Tokyo is a wonderful city, but there are other things, deregulation or the corporate tax, those are the things that the government can do. But think about this. Mori Foundation is doing a wonderful thing that it is doing. And this is a private sector. The private sector is working so hard. Therefore, the government should really work harder so the public and then also the private sector interaction. This is a time for Japan. It's a time of election. So we really have to think in that manner, private and also the public sector. Thank you very much. We'd like to thank all the panelists who have participated wonderfully. Thank you very much.
竹中先生ありがとうございました。どうぞ今井
Thank you very much, Professor Takenaka. And once again, please give them a big round of applause. Professor Sassen, Professor Bender, Professor Scott, Professor Nijkamp.